go. Okay. Well, as we continue on, I want to say welcome to the third week of the quarter. For those of you who are familiar with the quarter system, you know that it just flies by so quickly. And so thanks for all the attentiveness that you've had to the coursework. So I thought I'd start and thank you, Laura, for being here with us. Laura is such a fount of wisdom as I'm getting to know her, and she will take one of these live chats here later in May when I'm gone. So I just wanted to start with addressing a couple of things that I noticed this week, and maybe some questions that I've heard throughout some of the assignments that have been turned in. And then I'll turn it back over to you and we can just have a chat with whatever's coming up for you. I know that we're here on Tuesday afternoon / evening. So you may have thoughts and questions from last week's work, or you may have questions as we're moving into this current week. And all of that is game. We can talk about whatever you'd like to. So again, and I know I keep saying this, so perhaps I'm a broken record, but I really do want to emphasize, especially as we get into the week on trauma, that we're not training you to be therapists. And hopefully that you're seeing what we're doing each week is we're building these building blocks that are helping you do your own internal work so that you know then how to care for yourself and how to care for others. So you're not necessarily going to go out and deploy these interventions of how to help someone in trauma. However, I do think that this work helps you recognize some of the signs. It helps you understand your own propensity perhaps to have triggers around trauma or not want to talk about it or try to fix. I mean, all of those sorts of internal motivations is what I'm hoping you can look at through all of these different assessments we're doing and the journaling that we're doing and the reading you're doing. So so that's just a piece on that, and feel free to, any questions, we can kind of come back and talk about the nuances of it. But the second thing to talk about is really your practices. Laura and I were really encouraged by everyone's engagement with the practices, both the practicing of it and then the journaling that happens on Thursday night, and then the reflection on Sunday night. So that's the rhythm that we're going to continue to have throughout the quarter. The practice that you will do changes each week, but that particular rhythm stays the same. And, you know, we're not very tough graders. You've probably noticed already, but we do hold to, you get full points if you both respond on time. So before midnight on Thursdays with your personal journal, and then responding to 2 people substantively before Sunday evening at midnight. Those are really the only indicators that we have that you would get points taken off for. So just remember those pieces as you continue to post your journals. We were really happy with it. Seems like everyone is really taking in the sentence stems that I suggested, that I like, I wish, I wonder. I hope that that's helpful for you in just framing how to respond to people's prompts as you move forward. But it was really great the ways you guys were engaging with that. Some people found these practices helpful, and some found them refreshing. Some discussed them with partners or friends or, you know, people at church. And then some actually didn't, they struggled with it. And so I just want to, again, emphasize all of that is part of what we're doing. I don't want you to act as though you need to let us know that you love this, that's somehow going to make you get a better grade. We know that this is sometimes challenging to enact some of these practices that maybe we haven't done before or haven't done in this way. So again, just be aware of just trying out these various things. We noted that some people like to do the practices in different places, like some did it in the park or on the bus or at work. So if you want to switch it up a little bit, notice what it's like to try and do a breathing exercise as you are, you know, in line at the post office or something like that. So, you know, just at different places where you might want to enact these kinds of different meditation and breathing practices. So I finally, I just want to say again, some of these practices may not be your cup of tea. Like you may not walk away saying, this is the kind of thing I'm going to incorporate into my life, into my rule of life, and I'm going to do this forever, and it's going to be great. I envision it more like a tool belt. Like we're giving you a tool belt with lots of different tools to help you think through the psychological sciences. And so it may be that they're not all things that you would like. That's okay. We're asking you to practice them anyway. And we also recognize, again, practicing something for a week doesn't necessarily make it a habit. We all know how habits are formed, right? Over time, in the same direction. That's how our deep spiritual practices are formed. And so I don't pretend to think that these are going to really take root if you've not done them before. Again, you may decide, I really like the breathing practice. I am going to incorporate that, and I'm going to make that a goal of mine to do that over time. That's great. That's part of our hope. Final thing, and then Laura, I'm just going to prep you. I'm going to just pass it over to you in case there's anything else you would like to say, because you also helped me look at the posts. But as we go into more of these breathing and meditative practices, there can be a tendency to say, oh, I failed at it. Like I tried to pay attention. I tried to kind of focus, and my mind wandered. And I'm not very good at this. I understand that tendency, and that's not what we're looking for here, right? Our minds are created to wander. Our minds are created to go and listen to various things that are happening around us. So what we're doing is we're kind of trying to create rhythms of listening and meditation to help our bodies and our brains regulate and kind of sit into a situation more. And so it's not about judgment, it's about noticing, hey, my mind just wandered there. Where did it go? What did it do? How do I bring it back? That's the kind of training that we're hoping for. Laura, do you have anything else you maybe would want to add to that?
Not to add to it, I like your emphasis in that it's part of a tool belt. It doesn't have to be rigid right now. It's more of put it in the back of your mind for when you actually need it. And when you find that you need it and then you remember to go to it, it gets really exciting. It's like, oh, it does work when you're in that stressful situation. But if you try to do it rigidly every single day, you might just get tired of it or feel like it's not worth it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks. Final piece here, you have your formation groups starting this week. Some of you may have already had that, or you will have that. I have reports that they've gone well and that people are excited to engage with them. So I hope that's has been delightful or will be delightful for you. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to you all. Do you have any questions? Do you have any concerns? Perhaps something I've already talked about or something you want to know about? Any of that is game.
I have a quick question. I think it's a quick question. It's just looking at the syllabus for our final paper. I just glanced at what you're asking. I want to make sure I understand, because it seems what you're asking us to do is, as best we know what our calling is going to be, just apply the readings. What have we learned from the readings to apply toward our calling? That's the basic, what you're looking for?
Great question. I am going to screen share so we can go over this together. Give me one moment. Okay. Okay, can you guys see that final paper case study? Okay, yep. Great. So the way that we've structured this course in terms of the final assignment is that it would be a reflection or a case study on something that has happened in your life. And the basics of it are, now that I know what I know, now that I have the lenses that I have, particularly with psychological science, how might I go back and look at that case study and think about it with different lenses? How might I reflect on it in different ways? So you'll see here, the focus of the final paper be a case study of your own choosing, drawing from your own personal experience. It should identify, you'll choose one particular psychological construct. So it might be embodied cognition. We've talked about that. It might be mindfulness, family systems, trauma-informed care, all of these different lenses. You can choose one, and you'll pull from the readings within that particular domain that you choose to support you in your writing of this. Describe a concrete scenario from your life or ministry that did not lead to thriving. So here's kind of a key. It needs to be something that didn't go well. It didn't go optimally. And that can sometimes, I know, be somewhat of a vulnerable experience, but I think these are the kinds of things that we learn from. What did you do that you thought you were doing well, or maybe you didn't know and it didn't go well? And now it's like you're looking backwards on it and saying, okay, that did not lead to thriving, whether for you, for others involved, the broader community. Consider how a psychologically informed approach might enable you to respond differently in the future, right? So what do I know now that might help me as I move forward? How does that help?
It does. I mean, I caught part of that, but there's a second part that I had not really focused on.
Yeah, great question.
Okay.
Thank you. And the particular scenario that you choose, you've only started to take in a lot of the material of the course, but the particular scenario that you choose may dictate which of those domains that you choose to pull in. If you're thinking about a system or an issue or at a church that happened that caused a lot of rift and conflict, it may make sense to do a family systems approach to that particular subject. Or it may be, a particular way that you responded to someone who had gone through a traumatic situation. And perhaps now that you might use the trauma-informed ministry to address that in a different way. And I'm happy to talk through all of these pieces with you as you go through it. Even sending me an outline of what you're thinking so I can help you think through it. But that is the basic gist. Okay, either on that or other questions, comments? Snide remarks?
Amy, I'm not on mute, right?
You are not on mute.
Okay. Thank you. Is it okay if we, have an idea for the case study and sort of, shoot you an email or two, just sort of like unpacking it and sort of, letting you, lean into that topic a little bit and guiding us along the way? Is that something that's okay with you?
Absolutely. Feel free to do that. If you just want to send me an email, even if it's not super well thought out, but just, hey, here are some things I'm thinking about. Here's what I'm considering using. And I'd be happy to go back and forth with you on that or set up a Zoom call, whatever would work for you.
Yeah, super. Thanks so much. I have an idea. I'm just not sure if it, you know what I mean? I'm not sure if it works or not. So I think that's where I'm looking for some guidance. Thanks.
Great. For sure. Absolutely. The birds are alive behind you, Karen. It's lovely to hear.
No kidding. They are crazy. The bird song is just nuts, which is half of the good reason for sitting outside. But the cardinals are crazy this time of year. They just cannot be quiet. And there's so many pairs of them right here in the neighborhood that it's constant from sunup to sundown.
So good.
Yep.
Well, let me open it up then. As you guys have been reading, what sticks out to you? What might you have found interesting, or what do you have questions about? Maybe there's something that irks you that you don't like. Always happy to talk about any of that here. So what's coming up for you all?
I do have a question under just, the weekly reading. Like if I look back at as an example at week 2, whether it be the lectures or the reading, is that what you hope will directly incorporate into our paper? Is there, you know what I mean? As an example, when I read, complex dynamical systems and embodiment, that's a pretty, heavy excerpt actually. So, what do you want us to do with that in the meantime? You know, as far as like, okay, I read this and some of it makes sense, but some of it is like, woo,
Mhm,
you know,
mhm.
so what do you want us to do with that in the meantime?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Karen. A few different ways I'll answer that. First, this is really our, even though this is the second quarter that this course has been taught, this is really our first iteration of this course. So we haven't shifted any of the readings since we started this course in the winter. So part of what we're doing as professors is listening to you all say, that was helpful for me, that was not helpful for me, etc. So I think in these kinds of chats, it's helpful just to kind of say, like, what can I get out of this, or am I getting anything, or that made no sense to me. I know that some of Dr. Warren Brown's pieces or the articles have been complex. I'm happy to break some of that down for you here. But I would say in general, we are trying to see what's going to be helpful for students. And so pull as much as you can that can be helpful out of it. I would say that the videos, for instance, complex dynamical systems, or the videos on trauma, there's usually a theme each week. And if you can kind of get to that theme and some of the pieces around it, that's the most important. Some people are going to be more interested in what I would say is more the philosophical side of what we're thinking about with psychological science, and others are really thinking, I really just like this to help me with my ministry. And so I think there's going to be a lot of people who are landing in different places. So take what you can and be thinking towards what is interesting to me, what can help me with my final paper and some of my reflections for my vocation. Yeah, I'll pass that back to Karen. Does that help, or do you have other questions?
It does help. I think that, and it could be that it's a little bit of a comparison to other classes, right? And I don't want to over compare. You almost get to process out the reading a lot of times in the asynchronous writing, in your, and you are asking us to do that, of course, in our journal on Thursdays. But that's not particularly or directly related necessarily unless we want to pull it in. For example, Dr. Brown, which, by the way, I love that interview thing and all those little excerpts. That like totally played into my ADHD, which I don't technically have, but that's okay. I like to say it anyway. So it totally played into that. But I found that, especially, with my former background as an RN, like the science aspect of it is really super intriguing. So I dig it. But at the same time, I was like, okay, how can I, process that with my classmates? And you know what I mean? Like on a weekly basis. And I think that what I'm hearing you say is, read the stuff, certainly bring it into the context if it happens to fit. But if not, then we're kind of holding on to that as sort of a reserve for our final case study.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I heard.
That's right. There are, as you've said, there are some opportunities for you to integrate your readings and the videos into the assignments. But really your assignments are the journals and then the assessments. So for your assessments, we were talking about personality this last week. And so as you think about how does our personality develop? Are we fixed in our personalities, or are we dynamic in our personalities? How do our personalities interact with all these other complex systems in which we come in contact with? So there's ways in which you could work it in if that's something that's interesting to you and kind of fits with your thinking of that week. But you're right, if it doesn't fit, there's not actually an assignment for us to make sure that you've really captured all of the reading. And that's really honestly here what this is for as well. It's just for us to talk about what's making sense, what's going over your head, so that we can maybe all agree that some of it is over our head, and I'll agree that there are some pieces that we can pull out. So
yeah, great. Okay, thanks for that. Appreciate that, Dr. Drennan.
Of course. Other either process questions or content, some things that you would like to talk about for this week. I have a couple questions here that I can pitch, but I wanted to make sure I didn't set the frame unless I needed to. But what else is standing out for you guys?
So I think this week in particular, excuse me, I worked in a population where there's quite likely a pretty high degree of trauma, both, in some cases in childhood, but then also almost like, self-perpetuated trauma. Drug addiction often results in, people doing terrible things to themselves and terrible things to the people that care about them. And so, I don't know, some of this week's readings have really hit pretty close to home and given me a little bit of a different, we try to be a little bit trauma informed here, but this is certainly, A, there's some introspection that I've been engaging in, but then B, how being trauma informed, how you're really being conscious and cognizant of how to approach someone who has maybe even consistently experienced a pretty high degree of trauma. So it's given me lots to think about, both personally and vocationally.
Yeah. Colin, can you remind us a bit more about the context for the ministry that you're talking about?
I wouldn't, so I work in an inpatient treatment center for adults with substance use disorders. So I'm a group leader here. And so the guys typically in my care are males that are 50 and above. And the population here on any given day is, somewhere between 80 and 100 total people, with half of them being male, or a little more than half usually being male, a little less than half being female. But primarily my responsibility is for the group that's males 50 and above. So they really take a good look at, while they're here, they really take a good look at, their, for lack of a better word, their drinking and using behavior and how that affects them and how that affects the people that are connected to them. And, that is often pretty negative, pretty grim. And, there's a real high degree of correlation between early childhood trauma and later developing substance use disorder. So a lot of these traumatic systems are, pretty thoroughly embedded in some of these guys.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious, Colin, as you're experienced in this role and you've worked with this population, now that you're receiving some of this extra training on thinking about trauma, what do you find that there has been gaps in your training or gaps in maybe your awareness that now you're getting to? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that the readings really brought up that is like I'm pretty short-sighted about is just how important like environment and approach and even the way you invite someone in to group, how that, depending on where that guy's at, how that can really be a trigger in some ways. And so I don't know, one of the things I guess I've appreciated about both Dr. McBride but then also Dr. Tima is just they have a real unique ability to kind of consider where the other person is at and really work towards being with that other person where they're at. And so that I find that I'm so impressed by that. And this, I feel like just being exposed to that helps me quite a bit. I have to be more conscious about that. They seem to have been so practiced at it that it's almost like intuitive to them, and I really have to work at it, which is just a matter of the practice, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Yeah, there is this interesting juxtaposition. Is that the word? There's two things that are being held at the same time, which is sometimes psychological science is trying to find the universals among us. Like what are these patterns of behavior that we can, diagnose and put into a DSM so that we can all know how to diagnose one another. And what are these things that we think are generally across the board, our behaviors or our personalities. And then you note that each of these things is contextually oriented, can come from family systems or attachment orientations, that there's a lot of different pieces that then mediate what we would say is this normative behavior.
Mhm.
And so as you're noting, Colin, it's always a practice then to hold what is normative to who. I always ask that question, like, who are we norming against, right? So that kind of universality, and then the particularities of this person sitting in front of you, and the kinds of trauma that he or she has gone through, and the kinds of context, and the kinds of social messaging, and the kinds of potentially, racist, sexist messages that he or she has been given, that then affects who they are and their behaviors.
Mhm.
And I think that the skill, a skill of people who are in these kinds of fields is to hold both. Other thoughts? Anything coming up? Well, then I will pose a question out to you guys that I have heard that I wonder will come up soon in our course. And so I'd be just curious what you guys think. I've had some folks, probably more last quarter, but some this quarter as well, curious about what we're doing with these practices of meditation, with mindfulness, some of these that seem more oriented in what we would say are like Eastern religious contexts, or those sorts of practices that we don't necessarily see them in Christian contexts, and that can bring some worry, some concern. And so I'm just curious how that strikes you and how you might think about that theologically. Any thoughts? That's my puppy behind me, sorry.
Amy, can you say the last part a little bit for me? You broke up. On my end, you broke up.
Sure, yeah. How do we think theologically about various practices that I would say are probably getting more accepted or practiced in the Christian church and our Christian circles, which are meditation, mindfulness, some of these practices that you might see disconnected from religion altogether, or more in the psychological world, or you might just see them connected to more Eastern religions. And so I'm just curious, like, how do you think about that theologically as we're asking you to do these practices in this course?
I don't know if this is the right way to think about it, but and I don't think this has, like, I bet you if you said something crazy to me like, Karen, use your exegesis and tell me how you came up with this, I'd be like, duh, I don't know. But it feels to me that well, first of all, I think that Ignatian spiritual practice and Ignatius, that was, very reflective and meditative, maybe not in the same Eastern tradition, but it feels to me like even Ignatius, like he was on to something, right? As far as, that kind of spiritual practice, but, and perhaps it's the, influence of my global traditions class too. But when I think about, some of the ways in which early Christianity formed and sort of, stamped out, if you will, for more power or political reasons, not because of theological reasons, that, why they wouldn't accept other cultures, or even supersessionism, why they wouldn't even continue to allow Jewish cultures, in the, Roman, Greco-Roman, Christian faith. It feels to me like, had those, political power plays maybe not occurred, those things maybe would have been a common thread. If you look at the Ethiopian church potentially, or, others, what would we have retained? You know what I mean? From those cultures, had we not, experienced this, sort of heavy European sort of, westernized version of Christianity. So, to my mind, I feel like we're not betraying anything theologically, and but yet I say that and I don't really have much to back it up except what I just said. It feels like we might have had some of those practices all along had not that generationally we in this circle were there, but had it not unfolded the way it did.
It's really great. It's really thoughtful.
Yeah, Karen, I completely agree with you. My first thought was normal to who, like what Amy was saying earlier, because meditation, embodiment, all of that has been part of churches in African, Asian countries for a very long time, probably since the beginning, like you said. So what I've learned too, like you said, in our history classes, is taking off the Western lens and seeing the Western lens as normative Christianity, and not being so quick to judge other cultures and the way they practice Christianity.
Yep.
Because is it a cultural thing, or is it genuinely a salvation issue? And most of the times it's cultural, but we come in with our Western lenses and go, no, that's uncomfortable, so I'm not going to do that, or stop doing that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that's not needed. It's actually a good thing for us to be more embodied.
Yeah, I just, I feel that you just never know how Jesus is going to use the Spirit, to communicate. And being introduced to new practices, to me feels like fellowship, depending on who you're learning it with too. You know what I mean? That I would assume that, there's some sort of community or potential group opportunity for that as well. But yeah, thanks for that, Laura. I appreciate it. So, I mean, you can tell, Jen Rosner that I'm paying attention in her class.
I had her class too.
Oh, are you? Yeah, between that and missional hermeneutics, I don't know which one is trying to ask us to take off our Western lenses more, but I dig it thoroughly.
It's really good. Jen used to be a hiking buddy of mine. We were at Fuller.
Oh, yeah?
So we're friends.
Oh, I love to hike. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm appreciating this conversation about what is normative, what has shaped us potentially over time to think what is normative and not when it comes to Christian practice. I think what we ask you to do in these courses, even if you don't agree with a particular reading or a particular author, or particular orientation, is that you put on theologically reflective lenses and ask good questions. So I think the questions of how have I been shaped to consider what is normative and not normative is really what we would hope for in these kinds of classes. If all truth is God's truth, then what can we glean from whatever comes to us, and what can we learn, and what can we deconstruct about the ways that perhaps we can't see the whole picture, or perhaps we do see the whole picture and it doesn't fit with what seems like is called normative. So I think that conversation is really valuable to hold on to as we move through. I think the other piece, and I would say also, if something feels threatening, like this practice feels like it may be, I mean, I'll be honest, growing up for me, doing meditation would have thrown off some yellow flags, right? In my Christian circles, like, what are you doing? And so I think not having a spirit of fear around those particular practices, but asking, like, what is it that's triggered? What am I worried about? What am I afraid about to do meditation, to do mindfulness? What is that connected to for me? I think those are the sorts of really questions that we're hoping that you'll reflect on. And also the truth is that even, I'm going to do this, Christian practices. So if you consider that there's sort of those that fall into the normative and not, even the things that most churches would agree on, like prayer, for instance, those can become disoriented too, or distorted as well, right? So I think it really depends on, and we talk about this a lot in the course, what's the telos of this particular practice? So it's not necessarily the practice itself that distorts, but it's what it's connected to. So you can pray And rather than having prayer mean, union with God or however you want to think about that, it could be it could be a bless me moment, right? It could be very much about me. And so that end goal isn't actually oriented towards God and God's wholeness and hope for us. So I think we can think about spiritual practices as a vehicle. And if the end goal contradicts what the message is, then we can know that there's something disconnected and disordered there. So that's the kind of theological reflection, thinking about, does the end goal meet the particular spirit of what this practice was to be for? I don't know. Does that resonate? How does that sound to you all?
It does for me, Dr. Drennan, and this is why I think that as you sort of ask us to use the I notice, I wish, I wonder, that to me feels like a way to marry those two concepts, you know what I mean? Where we can just simply have this forum to ask a question, about, well, okay, I did this meditational practice. And as you gave an example earlier in our discussion, and my mind wandered all over the place and you could always, pull that sort of in, because let's face it, even if we pray in a particularly, sort of Western traditional fashion, my mind still wanders all over the place sometimes. So, I think that it'll be interesting for me to incorporate those questions and sort of think along that theological line and see if there's something I can come up with to sort of add some brain teasing for myself and others. So I'm down. Sounds good. I'm trying to use all the hip language, because apparently, I don't know why I did that. Actually, I'm 53 years old. I have probably no business using all the hip.
No, be hip. Do it. I love it. Thank you, Karen. Thanks for being down and being into it. I appreciate those comments. It's great.
Sure.
Are there any other reflections or thoughts on that? Oh, I would say one thing I do, I'm just going back to you talking about my suggestion about the mind wandering. Sometimes it's a theological moment for me too, a spiritual moment where I say, Jesus always invites me back in. At every moment, God is inviting me back in to be in relationship with God. And so my mind wanders. I'm wondering what dinner is going to look like tonight. I think I might need to take my puppy out. And oh my goodness. Okay, gosh, I'm off of it now. Thank you, God, that at every moment, Spirit, you invite me back in to fellowship with you. So it's a really sweet moment for me sometimes. And even that reframes how I think about that particular practice.
Yep. Okay, I have to ask you the dumbest question ever. Please tell me about your puppy. Is it truly a puppy? What is the makeup of your puppy? I must know all, because I pick up a puppy next Monday after the death of my dear Walter, who was my 12-year-old greyhound, which was just the worst day ever. But I'm jumping right back into the pool there with a puppy. So tell me about yours.
I would be happy. I would probably say more than you want to know about my puppy and my dog. I want to make sure we get to the end of our questions, so I'll hold on to that. And when we're done, you and I can stay on and we can chat about my puppy, because I'd love
Thank you.
Yeah, any other things? So we did a personality assessment this week. You all were reading about these complex systems in which we're a part. We talked about the big five and kind of those pieces. Is there anything else that and we're really just starting to build the building blocks, but is there anything else that's gurgling up that you might have questions about or just want to bring here?
Let me, I'm gonna go back and see if there is any. I really like Dr. Warren Brown's, I liked the format, and I sort of was really curious to learn more, as he got into that. The article, or the chapter from Richardson, and is it Chimero or Camaro?
I'm not sure, honestly.
Okay, fair enough, because if it's Camaro, that's super cool in a way. But complex dynamical systems and embodiment, that was a tough one. to get through from a technical perspective. But I don't have any questions, if you know what I mean, like about it. I loved flourishing and languishing. I thought that was really interesting and a great way to leverage the Psalms. So a thumbs up on that one. I think it's a good one for to keep in mind for the final paper for me as well. But as far as like questions, I don't think I have any, to be honest with you. I mean, that's just general feedback. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, though.
Yeah, that's great.
I think too, what's helpful with these practices every week is bringing a practical side to Christianity that I think is often missing in Western Christianity. For instance, I think Colin alluded to this early on in the class a few weeks ago about with the wisdom of your body and writing a letter to your body and learning to love yourself, or learning the way you talk to yourself is often the way you speak to other people. But that's not something that we talk about in Christianity. We just say, love your neighbor as you love yourself. But how do we love ourselves? Or we talk about be transformed by the renewal of your mind. But what does that mean? And how do you renew your mind? Like there's a practical side of Christianity that we often don't get to. And I think each week, the things that we're reading, the things that we're doing brings that to light. Because like Colin said, being older, I have a friend who came into Christianity in her mid 40s, and her question, and she came in from a whole completely different faith tradition. And her question was, what do you guys do? And I was like, what do you mean? What do we do? And she's like,
Wow.
do you meditate? Do you, like, what do you do? Like, what do you, and he was like, you're right. Yeah, you're right. There's a tangible aspect to a lot of faith religions that we miss a lot of. And I think this helps to bring that to the forefront, especially like reading the Psalms and what does that mean? What does that do? And how can we lean into that? So I hope that's helpful as people go into each week's practice.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Laura. And that just makes me think as well that this perspective of embodiment then makes us read our scriptures differently. It makes us understand perhaps how Christianity became disconnected from our body. It became disconnected from what we do in so many ways. And it even happened to me today. I was in another meeting and someone brought up Psalm 1, which, is kind of this beautiful psalm, the tree that's, is put next to the streams of water, and how it flourishes in God's timing, and it has fruitfulness in God's time. And this person was like, notice that this is a very embodied psalm, that this tree is in a particular context, and it's situated in a particular community, and it has a particular role, and it's faithful, and then God produces the fruitfulness. And I was like, I am teaching a class on embodiment, and I did not see that. So I think it helps us reinterpret not only kind of what church looks like, but how we read scripture. And we'll see that again with Dr. Thema this week as she talks about Hagar, that there's particular ways that these lenses of psychological science become our relational, or friends with, as Dr. Cherry talks about, friends with theology that helps us then to see in this friendship how to emphasize some things that we just didn't see before, that are, we're getting new lenses. So
I think it helps us see the humanity of people in the Bible in ways that we just kind of gloss over, like, oh yeah, Abraham, oh yeah, Hagar. But when you slow down enough to apply these things to it, and you're like, oh man, that is trauma. That is abuse. Wait a minute. Why don't we talk about this in church?
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Well, very good. Thank you all. I am glad that you're tracking with the readings and integrating it. You're curious. You all are doing a great job. And everyone who's watching this as well, just really grateful for your engagement. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, or if you want to see pictures of my puppy, because I'm happy to show more of those. But just wanted to say I'm really grateful for you all, and I'm excited for this class and where we continue to go. So I'm going to stop recording now. Maybe.